Welcome to cardiovascular 2, right? So now that we're done with the heart, now we're going to talk about in this lecture, blood flow and blood pressure. Okay, so for our first lecturette, we're going to go over blood vessel anatomy. All right, so we're going to review anatomy in a way that's functional for physiology. So it's not that we're going to go memorize all the names of tunica externa and tunica media, but just the overall differences between artery and veins so we can understand what's happening at a physiological level. So if you look at arteries, right, this is now this comparison and contrast. So if you look on the right side, it's all your arteries, here are your veins, and we get smaller to the capillaries, arterioles and venules. Arteries have very, very thick muscle walls, okay? And they need that, right? And they also have these really, really thick connective tissue wrappings. Because if you think about where arteries are, okay? So arteries are closest to the pump, the heart. So arteries have to withstand very, very high pressure. These are high pressure tubes, yes? So what happens, especially in a high pressure artery like the aorta, is as soon as I get blood pumped into the aorta has to expand. Okay, so if I have thin walls, I can rip, and I don't want that. And so what needs to also happen is I need to now transmit blood under high pressure, but then also to defy gravity. So that's what these thick muscular walls are doing. And then also for recoil. So if you think about a balloon, yes, and let's say that this blood vessel is a balloon, and let's say we fill it up with air or water, it doesn't matter, and you go ahead and fill it up so its walls stretch, and then you let the balloon go. The walls of the balloon will recoil, right? And that will spit air out or spit water out. And so that's the function of these structures here. Okay. Now, as we now go into smaller and smaller blood vessels, arteries become smaller arteries, which become arterioles, which become capillaries, then venules, and then these bigger and bigger veins, right? So if you look at veins have a thin wall. Okay, so these thin walls allow us now to have a lot of stretch. This word called distension, right? So if you have a distended tummy or distended stomach, you've now filled your stomach with so much food that it's stretched out. Okay, and that stretching out of these veins, especially large veins that are close up to the heart, it becomes a blood reservoir. This is one of a few reservoirs that we're going to have in the cardiovascular system. Okay, so remember that. Large veins become reservoirs for blood, okay? Now, the thing, though, about veins is they're farthest away from the heart. And even though a vein here, like the superior inferior cava, is in proximity close to the heart, in regards to pressure, it's now traveled all the way around the body. And so the pressure now coming in to a large vein like this is very, very, very low because it is the farthest away from the heart. Okay. Now, veins have something special, and not all veins have these, but they have these one-way valves, and this allows us to help blood flow coming back up to the heart against gravity. So I don't have this backflow of blood going back down to my extremities. Okay. Now, arterioles are smaller arteries, and what their job is to deliver blood into the capillaries. Okay. So every good arteriole is going to have a sphincter. Okay. So think about what sphincters do. Sphincters are smooth muscle. Okay. And what they're going to do now is control the diameter of the specific area where arteries are now flowing blood into capillaries. Capillaries are only one cell thick, so one red blood cell at a time can flow through here. So the arterial sphincters play an important role in making sure that capillaries don't break. Because if you let too much blood in here, it doesn't take much to break capillaries. Okay, and if you break capillaries, what you're going to find here is capillaries are responsible for making sure that we have transit of all the materials that cells need and taking away wastes from these cells. So if you don't have capillaries, those cells will die. Now I just want to go over just a very brief and quick anatomy review of the capillary beds. And it's not so much to remember all of the information in this slide, but just to see the anatomy, and I'll point out some important differences. So we have three types of capillaries, right? We have something called continuous, fenestrated, and sinusoid. And so what you're going to see here is capillaries are made out of endothelial cells, okay? And so I have an endothelial cell bound to another endothelial cells, and they have junctions here. And the junctions, right, will dictate what can now come out of the capillaries, okay? So our least permeable capillary is the continuous capillary, okay? And they have leaky junctions, and leaky junctions only allow small, tiny molecules to come out. Water, salts, sugars, amino acids, but nothing big, right? No proteins can come out of here. No macromolecules can come out of here, okay? And so a lot of places in our body have a continuous capillary system. Now, depending on where the capillaries go will dictate the space in between and inside of these endothelial cells. Now, a fenestrated capillaries, right, is more permeable, right, because it has these pores called fenestrations. And you don't have to memorize fenestrations, but it just means a pore. It's got holes in it, okay? And so the holes allow passage of molecules that are a little bit bigger, okay? So and a little bit of proteins, not a lot of proteins and not big proteins, but small proteins. So when we start talking about the kidney and endocrine system and intestines, right? So if we are going to now absorb proteins, right, that we're digesting, we have to have a little bit of bigger space, right? In the kidney, we're going to filter our blood for waste. And so the pores have to be a little bit bigger, okay? And then also endocrine, right? The endocrine system, they're secreting protein hormones, and so the capillaries there have to be, or the spaces in between the endothelial cells of the capillaries in that go to endocrine glands have to be a little bit bigger to let these protein hormones be secreted into our bloodstream. And then lastly, we have something called sinusoidal capillaries. And look at these holes, right? They're big old gaps. They're the most permeable. Cells can leave here, huge proteins, okay? So these sinusoidal capillaries are in the marrow, liver, and spleen. And what we're going to see is in marrow, this is where I make red blood cells, white blood cells, and they need to enter the bloodstream. So that space is big enough for these cell types to pass in here. The liver, same thing, right? I have to go ahead and take out red blood cells from circulation, old ones, to allow them to undergo apoptosis, and then the spleen also has to take out red blood cells, but also put new red blood cells in. So again, structure tells you function, and the space in between the capillary cells or within the capillary cells will dictate what can come in and out. All right, so let's wrap up lecture 1 by going over just the major piping of our cardiovascular system. So here, we just talked about the heart, and that we have now a major blood vessel called the artery, which will then turn into an arterial and then become a capillary bed, okay? And then the capillary bed will turn into a veinule, which means small vein, which will turn into medium-sized veins and then big veins, and that goes back to the heart. And that's the main system. It should always go artery, arterial, capillary bed, veinule, vein, heart, okay? But there are special arrangements, and these are called a portal system, okay? And so this is when you have two capillary beds joined in a series. And if you don't remember this from anatomy, I'm bringing this to your attention because you're going to see this when we talk about the kidney and the digestive system. So what you're seeing here is we have now the aorta. And the aorta is a major artery. It's going to turn into arterial. I'm going to go now into a capillary bed. But what you're seeing now, instead of going into a capillary bed, veinule, and then vein, I've now turned into another, this can be an arterial or veinule. But look, I now have another capillary bed. Okay? So I'm now going capillary bed, arterial, capillary bed. Then I can go into veinule and then vein. Okay, this is what it means to have two capillary beds joined in a series. All right, and that is an exception to the rule, and that doesn't happen everywhere in the body. It only happens in 3 special places in the body. So we have one in the liver, we have one in the kidney, and then there's one in the brain. Okay, and the purpose of a portal system is to shunt blood. Okay, move blood to a specific place before it goes back into major circulation. All right, that's it for lecturette 1. Next up, lecturette 2, we're going to get into blood pressure.